Hi, friend. Welcome back to my John 17 for Life podcast. Today is Highlight Monday, where we're going to go through my notes from our previous episode and take a deep dive into one topic. This way, you can take some practical application for your life so you can step into your John 17 for life. On the last episode, there was one line that stayed with me long after the conversation ended. He said, "Why would God call someone like me?" And I think I'm not the only one that has asked that question of themselves. Maybe not out loud, but internally, even quietly. Why would God use me with my past, definitely with my mistakes, and with everything I've been through? And if we're honest, a lot of us will disqualify ourselves before God even has a chance. We assume we're too broken, messy, way too behind, definitely uneducated, and there's so many wounds. But throughout scripture, God has a pattern. And his pattern is that he uses ordinary people, not polished people, definitely not perfect people, but ordinary, broken people, people with fear and shame, people with complicated histories. And that's exactly what we heard in this interview. Here's a man who walked through war, PTSD, depression, anxiety, shame, regret. And yet God still called him, not after he became perfect, not after he had it all together, right in the middle of his humanity. And I want to stop here because this matters. A lot of people think calling starts once you become impressive. Calling usually starts when you finally surrendered. And those are not the same thing. Because surrender says, God, I don't have everything figured out, but here am I. I am willing. Send me. And honestly, the willing, it matters more than the polish. He talked about how he wrestled with his calling, how it felt heavy. He resisted. Honestly, he didn't want it. But that's more biblical than most people realize. Moses made excuses. Gideon laid out fleece. Jonah ran away. And Jeremiah, he resisted. But those people were deeply called by God, and they still wrestled with insecurity. Why? Because the calling exposes your limitations. It forces you to confront the places where you feel weak. And that's why most people pull away. They think, if I feel afraid, then maybe I'm not called. No, it's not true. Sometimes the fear is actually the proof that you understand the weight of what God is asking you to do. And here's the truth I want you to hear today. Feeling unqualified does not mean you are disqualified. I'm going to say it again. Feeling unqualified does not mean you are disqualified. Because if God only used people who were fully ready or felt fully ready, almost nobody in scripture would be qualified. Remember, Gideon was hiding and he kept putting out the fleece. Moses and his excuses of not being able to speak well. Peter, he was impulsive. And Paul, he held the coats of the men who were stoning disciples. And God used them anyway, not because they were naturally ordinary, not because they were naturally extraordinary, but because God is. And this is where I want to take you a little bit deeper, because I think a lot of you secretly believe my past has ruined my future. I want you to consider that your past is actually what has prepared you for your calling. He talked about how he regretted the years he felt he wasted. And I think many of us feel that way. You look back and think, I wish I would have started sooner. If I had only listened earlier, if I hadn't messed up. But hindsight can either produce wisdom or shame. And that shame is what's keeping you stuck in the version of yourself God already redeemed. I want you to listen carefully. Your past may explain you, but it doesn't define you. And God is not standing there shocked by your history. You cannot surprise God. He knew every chapter before he called you. This means your mistakes did not cancel his plan. And I need you to take that in deeply. Because if you're living like your failures are louder than God's grace, then you have minimized God. Your sin, your mistakes, your failures are never going to be bigger than God's grace. Jesus settled that on the cross. Now, does that mean your choices don't matter? No. But it does mean this: God is able to redeem things you thought you ruined. And that, my friends, is the beauty of grace. Not that you never struggled, but that God still pursued you through the struggle. He talked about all the moments where God protected him before he even returned to him. And isn't that how God works? You realize later God was preserving you in seasons you didn't even recognize him in. And when you finally are able to see that, it will change you, because suddenly your story stops being, look at how broken I was, and it becomes, look how faithful God has been. And that perspective will change everything. Now, I want to speak specifically to the person listening who feels stuck because you keep comparing yourself. You see someone online, someone more educated, articulate, they've got experience, and they're polished. And you quietly decide, well, God could use them, but not me. And that comparison will destroy your calling inside of you if you let it. Because comparison will keep your eyes on someone else's assignment instead of stewarding your own. And this is where his story matters so much. He said he didn't have all the degrees. He didn't feel qualified. He questioned why God would choose him. And yet, God did choose him. He opened the door, because God doesn't use the most impressive person in the room. Sometimes he uses the person most willing to surrender. And I think we need to stop waiting to feel enough education, enough confidence, enough spirituality. Because if you wait until you're fully ready, you're never going to move. And here is the deep truth of it: God will grow you while you walk, not before. And that means you're going to learn while serving, heal while obeying, and grow while showing up. You do not have to arrive fully formed. You just have to be willing. So let's make this practical. I want you to ask yourself this question: what part of my story have I been treating like a disqualification that God may actually want to use? That deep pain, your failure, your background, your insecurity. Because often the very place you feel weakest is the place that God will move most powerfully. And he does it for a reason. He does this so you can't do it in your power, but you do it with him. I want to leave you with one last thing. God never needed perfection to fulfill purpose. He needs surrender, willingness, and obedience. And if God can use shepherds, fishermen, tax collectors, doubters, and people with complicated stories, then he can use you too. Not someday, not after you become flawless, but right now. Because the calling on your life was never dependent upon your perfection. It was always dependent on your faithfulness to God.